The rain on the window was the only sound in the billion-dollar boardroom. Amelia Davenport sat in a chair by the door, deliberately ignored. Her husband, Richard, and his sister, Seraphina, were carving up their father's empire before the will was even read. They saw her as wallpaper, a quiet, decorative wife. But they had no idea the meeting wasn't for them. It was for her. They thought they were predators in a tank, but they were about to find out they were minnows, and the quiet woman they snubbed was the shark. Stay tuned to see how one woman's silence was the most powerful weapon in the room. The boardroom at Gideon, Hale and Mercer was a monument to old money. The walls were panelled in a dark, almost black mahogany. The air itself felt heavy, smelling faintly of old leather and floor polish. Outside the 40th floor picture window, a November storm was trying to crack the city in two. Rain hammered the glass in violent, angry waves. It was the perfect setting for the end of an empire, or the beginning of one. Richard Davenport, his large frame stuffed into a 20C Zegna suit, was already pacing. He was a man who took up space, who believed his voice was the most important in any room. He was currently using it to complain about the coffee. "Is this instant?" he boomed, glaring at the silver urn. "For what father paid this firm, you'd think they could spring for single origin." His sister, Seraphina Davenport Blackwood, didn't look up from her phone. She was the opposite of her brother, cold, contained, and sharp. Where Richard was a sledgehammer, Seraphina was a scalpel. "Sit down, Richard. You look like a caged animal. It's unbecoming." "It's about control, Sarah. Father understood that. This whole charade, making us wait. He's dead, Richard. His charade is over. Now it's ours." A third man sat at the far end of the long table, utterly silent. Marcus Thorne. He was not family. He was a rival, a vulture. His presence was a calculated insult by the late Arthur Davenport, a final poke in the eye to his children. Thorne's company, Thorne Industries, had been trying to buy Ethelred Holdings for a decade. He was here to see the carcass carved up, and perhaps to pick up the most valuable pieces. The heavy door opened with a soft click. Amelia Davenport slipped into the room. If the three occupants were sharks, Amelia was a minnow, or so they thought. She was 5'5", slender, and dressed in a simple, charcoal grey cashmere dress. No diamonds, no flashy watch. Her brown hair was tied back in a simple, functional bun. She was, by all appearances, the trophy wife, and a budget model one at that. Richard saw her and scoffed. "Amelia, you're late." "The meeting is at 10. It's 9:58, she said, her voice soft. "Don't be pedantic. What are you even doing here?" he snapped. "This is for family. And Mr. Thorne?" "Mr. Hale's office called me. They said my presence was required," she said, taking a seat in the empty chair by the door, far from the central power of the table. Seraphina finally looked up, her eyes flicking over Amelia with a disdain that was almost physical. "They probably need you to sign a release for the housekeeping staff. Just sit there, be quiet, and try not to cry." Marcus Thorne didn't even give her a glance. He was checking stock tickers on his phone. A wife was not a C-suite player. She was irrelevant. Amelia's hands rested on the simple leather portfolio in her lap. She didn't flush. She didn't fidget. She simply waited. She observed. She saw the nervous tick in Richard's hand as he straightened his tie. She saw the almost imperceptible tremor in Seraphina's thumb as she scrolled. She saw the predatory calm of Marcus Thorne. She filed it all away. At 10 a.m. on the dot, the door opened again. Mr. Hale entered. He was a man in his late 60s, thin as a rail, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He was the Hale in Gideon, Hale and Mercer, and he had been Arthur Davenport's executor and fixer for 40 years. He was the closest thing the city had to a high society judge. "Good morning," he said, his voice a dry rustle. The room fell silent. "We are here to execute the last will and testament of Arthur Elias Davenport. I will be reading the relevant portions. There will be no interruptions. This is not a discussion. It is a decree." He sat, placed a thick, blue-bound document on the table, and looked at the 4 people in the room. Richard leaned forward, like a bulldog on a leash. Serafina sat up straight, her poise perfect. Marcus Thorne put his phone away. And Amelia just watched. Hale put on a pair of thin-rimmed glasses. "Let us begin. I, Arthur Elias Davenport, being of sound mind and body." Mr. Hale's voice was a monotone drone, cutting through the thick, expectant silence. He read through the initial legal declarations, the formal revocation of all previous wills, and the appointment of Mr. Hale himself as the sole executor. Richard was already vibrating with impatience. Yes, get on with it, man. Who gets the company?" Mr. Hale paused. He slowly, deliberately, looked up from the will, fixing Richard with a stare that had frozen the blood of better men. "Mr. Davenport, I believe my instructions were clear. There will be no interruptions. If you speak again out of turn, I am legally empowered to have you removed from these premises. The will shall be read in your absence. Do you understand me?" Richard's face purpled, a vein pulsing in his temple. He had never been spoken to like that, especially not since his father's passing. But one look at Hale's icy, unblinking expression told him the man was not bluffing. He sank back into his leather chair, his jaw clenched so tight, a muscle in his cheek lipped. Serafina permitted herself a tiny, cold smirk. "Idiot," she thought, looking at her brother. "It's a performance. Just let the old man read." "Very good," Hale said, returning to the document. "We will begin with the distribution of personal effects and properties." He proceeded to read a list of bequests. "To my daughter, Serafina Davenport Blackwood, I leave the entirety of my art collection, currently valued at approximately $40 million. I also leave her the Davenport estate in the Hamptons. May you find more joy in them than I ever did." Serafina's expression didn't change, but she gave a single, satisfied nod. The art was a prime, liquid asset, and the Hamptons estate was a symbol of social dominance, a solid, if expected, inheritance. "To my son, Richard Davenport, I leave my collection of vintage automobiles, including the 1962 Ferrari 250 GTO. I also leave him my penthouse apartment on Park Avenue." Richard preened. The GTO alone was worth over $50 million. He was the son, after all. This was only proper. Good. A fine start," he muttered under his breath. Mr. Hale continued, "To my loyal staff, including my driver, my chef, and my household manager, I bequeath sums of $1 million each, to be paid from the estate's liquid reserves." Richard and Serafina both bristled at this. "$1 million?" Richard whispered, outraged. "To the cook?" "And now," Mr. Hale said, his tone shifting almost imperceptibly, "we come to my daughter-in-law." All eyes, for a brief, dismissive second, slid to Amelia. "To my daughter-in-law, Amelia Davenport," Mr. Hale read, "who has been married to my son for 5 years. I leave my personal library, located at the main estate, and my complete collection of first edition novels. I also leave her my favorite desk, the one at which I signed my first major deal." Silence. Richard actually let out a short, barking laugh. "Books! He left you books! And a desk!" He beamed, his relief and amusement palpable. "Well, Amelia, looks like you'll have plenty to read. Don't look so glum. It's more than you came with, isn't it?" Serafina simply shook her head, a look of pitying disgust on her face. How quaint. Father always did have a sentimental streak for strays. Marcus Thorne, the shark, didn't even register the bequest. He was watching Richard and Seraphina. The real players had been named. The wife had been handled. She'd been given her trinkets. Now she was irrelevant. Amelia alone understood the gift. She remembered 2 years ago being in Arthur's library. He'd found her there, not reading Jane Austen, but a dog-eared copy of Security Analysis by Benjamin Graham. A heavy read for a cocktail party, Arthur had rumbled from the doorway. "I like to know how things work," she'd replied, not startled. Arthur had looked at her, really looked at her, for a full minute. Then he'd walked to his desk, the very one now bequeathed to her. He tapped it. "This desk is where I built everything. Steel, concrete, data. It's all just how things work." Most people are too lazy to read the instructions. He'd then pulled a book from his private shelf, a nondescript, leather-bound volume, and handed it to her. "Try this one. It's denser." It had been his personal journal of his first 10 years in business. Now in the boardroom, Amelia looked Mr. Hale in the eyes. Her face was a perfect, polite mask, but she gave him a small, fractional nod. "Thank you." Hale, in return, simply cleared his throat. We now move to the primary asset of the estate, the disposition and control of Ethelred Holdings and its international subsidiaries. The room snapped back to attention. The air crackled. The smiles were gone from Richard's and Seraphina's faces. This was it, the main event. "As you all know," Hale said, "Ethelred Holdings is a publicly traded company. However, the Davenport family has always maintained a controlling interest through a private family trust. This trust holds 60% of the voting shares. The remaining 40% is public float. The disposition of this 60% controlling interest," Hale read, "is the final and most significant matter of my will." Richard leaned so far forward, he was almost lying on the table. Seraphina's back was ramrod straight. "Get on with it," Richard hissed, forgetting his promise. Hale, for the first time, almost smiled. "As you wish." "The 60% controlling interest held within the Davenport Family Trust," Mr. Hale began, his voice echoing in the sudden, tomb-like silence, "is to be divided as follows." Richard and Seraphina both held their breath. This was the moment. The crown. "To my son, Richard Davenport, who has served as the Chief Executive Officer of Ethelred Holdings for the past 3 years. I leave a 10% stake in the family trust." The words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Richard's face went through a rapid, terrifying series of transformations. First, confusion. He blinked, as if he'd heard wrong. "What?" 10%, Hale repeated, his voice flat. 10? Richard's voice was a strangled whisper. Then it erupted. 10%! That's an insult! That's nothing. I'm the CEO. I'm his son. There must be a mistake. "There is no mistake, Mr. Davenport. The will is certified and notarized." Hale's gaze was merciless. He turned a page. "To my daughter, Seraphina Davenport Blackwood." Seraphina was already processing. 10% for Richard. Her mind was racing. Did he leave the rest to me? Did he leave it to charity? Did he... "I also leave a 10% stake in the family trust." The scalpel snapped. Seraphina's face, usually a mask of cold control, went white-hot with a fury that was almost more frightening than Richard's bluster. 10, she said. Her voice was terrifyingly calm. He left his only children, 10% each. "This is a joke," Richard roared, slamming his 20,000-suited fist onto the mahogany table. "A goddamn joke! 10%! That's not even a controlling interest. That makes us minority shareholders. We can be pushed out, overruled." "That's 20% total," Serafina said, her mind already moving to the next logical step. "What about the other 40%? Hale, who got the other 40%? She turned, her eyes narrowing into slits, and stared at the one other variable in the room. Thorne. Marcus Thorne, who had been watching this with the detached amusement of a biologist watching rats in a maze, suddenly found himself the center of attention. "Did he leave it to you?" Serafina's voice was a hiss. "Was this your long game all along? You poison our father against us, and then swoop in and buy his shares from the grave?" Thorne actually raised his hands, a genuine, if predatory, smile playing on his lips. "I assure you, Miss Blackwood, this is as much a surprise to me as it is to you, though I must say it's a fascinating development. So, Mr. Hale, where is the remaining 40%? The room was a powder keg. Richard was apoplectic, pacing and pulling at his collar. Serafina was a coiled snake, ready to strike at anyone. And Amelia, by the door, remained perfectly, utterly still. Her portfolio remained closed in her lap. "If you will allow me to continue," Mr. Hale said, his voice slicing through the chaos. Richard and Serafina both shot him venomous looks, but fell silent. "The remaining 40% of the Davenport family trust," Hale read, "is not to be distributed." The confusion returned. "What does that mean?" Richard demanded. "Not distributed? Does it go to the state? Is it dissolved?" "It means, Mr. Davenport," Hale said, his patience clearly wearing thin, "that the 40% stake is not a simple inheritance. It is the settlement of a prior and binding contractual obligation entered into by Arthur Davenport years before his death." This was a twist no one saw coming. "A contract?" Serafina said, leaning forward. "With who? What obligation?" Mr. Hale took off his glasses and polished them. He was, Amelia realized, enjoying this. Arthur had staged this entire play, and Hale was the lead actor, relishing his final, dramatic monologue. 10 years ago, Hale began, Arthur Davenport became disillusioned. He saw, let's call it, a lack of vision in his designated heirs. He believed the future of Ethelred Holdings was not in manufacturing, not in logistics, but in data. Pure, predictive data analytics. Marcus Thorne's smile faded completely. He sat up straighter. He knew what that meant. That was the real money. That was the new frontier. He approached a young, brilliant analyst, Hale continued. Someone he had observed. Someone he believed to be utterly ruthless in their efficiency and, more importantly, completely invisible. He wanted to build a new company, a skunk works project, in secret. A company that would one day become the brain for Ethelred's body. "A secret company?" Richard said. "Father never mentioned any secret company." "That was rather the point, Richard," Serafina snapped. "Who, Hale? Who was the analyst?" Mr. Hale put his glasses back on. Arthur provided this entrepreneur with seed capital. $1 million. A test. He also, as collateral and a show of faith, pledged his 40% controlling stake in the Ethelred Trust to this new, independent venture. The contract was simple. Upon his death, his stake in Ethelred would revert as payment to this new company, if this new company had, in his words, proven itself worthy. "And?" Thorne asked, his voice tight. "This new company, founded 10 years ago, with $1 million, codenamed Project Chimera, was officially valued at the close of business yesterday," Hale said, "at $45 billion. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. $45 billion. That was more than Ethelred Holdings. This Chimera wasn't a subsidiary. It was the parent. "So who owns it?" Richard shouted, his face slick with sweat. "Who owns Chimera Analytics? Who gets the 40%? Mr. Hale turned the final page of the main will. The will now directs us to the ownership filing for Chimera Analytics, LLC, registered in the state of Delaware. The sole owner, founder, and CEO of Chimera Analytics, and therefore the new majority shareholder of Ethelred Holdings." He paused, looking over his glasses, first at Richard, then at Seraphina, then at Marcus Thorne. And then his gaze settled on the quiet woman by the door. "Is Mrs. Amelia Davenport?" The silence that followed Mr. Hale's pronouncement was not a normal silence. It was a vacuum, a void where all sound, all air, all comprehension had been violently extinguished. Richard Davenport's jaw worked open and closed, but no sound came out. He looked at Amelia, then at Hale, then back at Amelia, his expression one of profound, almost comical disbelief. Seraphina's reaction was quieter and far more terrifying. She simply stared at Amelia. The mask was back, but her eyes were burning with a cold, calculating hatred that was almost pure. She was replaying every snub, every dismissive comment, every time she had looked at Amelia and seen nothing. Marcus Thorne was the first to find his voice. He let out a single sharp laugh. "Well, I'll be damned." He leaned back in his chair, looking at Amelia with a newfound, hungry respect. "A ghost. You've been a ghost in this city for 5 years, Mrs. Davenport. And all along, you were the house." "This is impossible," Richard finally roared, finding his voice. "It's a fraud, a forgery. She's a librarian. She reads novels. She can't even balance a checkbook. Father would never. "On the contrary, Mr. Davenport," Hale said, his voice cutting through the tantrum. "Your father was meticulous. The will includes a notarized addendum, a journal of his Project Chimera." Hale lifted a second, thinner, blue-bound book. "He details everything. The initial seed money, the first-year report, where—" He glanced at a page. "Ah, yes. Amelia turned my $1 million into $10 million in 11 months. She called it a modest success and told me to reinvest it. Said the test phase was over. He seems to have found it immensely amusing." He was senile," Richard yelled, his eyes wild. She was sleeping with him. It's the only explanation. The old fool and the young." Smack! The sound echoed like a gunshot in the mahogany room, but it wasn't Amelia who had moved. It was Seraphina. She had crossed the space between her chair and her brother's and slapped him, hard, across the face. "Shut up, Richard," she hissed, her face inches from his. "Don't you dare give her the satisfaction. You are a fool. You're emotional. You're done. Stop talking." She turned, her movements as fluid and dangerous as a panther, to face Amelia. You've been playing us. For 5 years. You've been sitting at our tables, drinking our wine, wearing our name, all while you plotted this." Amelia, who had been silent through the entire reveal, finally unclasped her hands. She placed her leather portfolio on the table. She unzipped it. "That's not," Amelia said, her voice clear and cold, "entirely accurate." Every head snapped toward her. Even Hale looked up, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "Mrs. Davenport?" Hale prompted. Amelia stood up, and with that simple movement, the entire center of gravity in the room shifted. It tilted, irrevocably, toward the small, unassuming woman in the grey dress. She was no longer by the door. She was the door. "That's not accurate, Mr. Hale," she repeated. She walked, not to the head of the table, but to the center, standing opposite him. "My apologies. Your records are slightly out of date." She pulled a single, data-thick file from her portfolio, and slid it across the polished wood to Mr. Hale. The 40% stake from Arthur's trust. That does revert to me, as owner of Chimera Analytics. That is correct. That gives me 40% of Ethelred Holdings. Richard, holding his red cheek, let out a shaky, relieved laugh. So, 40%. Serafina and I have 20%. That's 60% family. We can vote you down. We... Amelia looked at him. It was the look of a scientist observing a particularly stupid, loud insect. Richard, please. The adults are talking. She used his own words against him. He flinched as if she too had slapped him. She turned her gaze to Marcus Thorne. Mr. Thorne, you're here because you have a standing $25 billion buyout offer for Ethelred on the table. It's a fair market offer, Thorne said, his eyes narrowed. He was on her turf now. It was, Amelia corrected. 6 months ago. But you weren't bidding against Richard and Serafina's incompetence. You were bidding against me, and you were losing. She turned back to the room. You see, Chimera Analytics, my company, isn't just a holding company. It's a predictive data engine. While Richard was at golf, I was stress-testing shipping logistics. While Serafina was at charity galas, I was modeling market fluctuations based on satellite imagery of Chinese ports. I don't guess, Mr. Thorne. I know. She pointed to the file in front of Hale. That 40% of the public float. I thought it was messy, uncontrolled, a variable I didn't like. So for the last 18 months, Chimera Analytics has been quietly, anonymously, and aggressively buying up Ethelred's public stock. Thorne's blood ran cold. He remembered the anonymous bidder, the one who kept outbidding him by pennies, the one his analysts couldn't identify. As of 9:31 a.m. this morning, Amelia said, when the market opened and the SEC filing delay officially cleared, my purchase of an additional 11.2% of Ethelred's public float was finalized. She looked at Mr. Hale. So no, I don't just own Arthur's 40%. She looked at Richard, at Serafina, at Marcus Thorne. She let the bomb hang in the air. I own 51.2%. I'm the majority owner. Outright, no trust, no partners, no family. Ethelred Holdings is a new subsidiary of Chimera Analytics, and I, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than all of Richard's shouts, am the house. The second bombshell was more devastating than the first. The first had been about inheritance. This was about conquest. Richard Davenport physically collapsed into his chair, his face a mask of grey, sweaty disbelief. 51. No. No. You're lying. This is a trick. Hale! Mr. Hale was already scanning the document Amelia had provided. It was a formal acquisition notice from the law firm Cravath, Swain and Moore, one of the most powerful corporate law firms in the world. This wasn't a will, it was a corporate execution. The documents appear to be, and are, Hale said, his voice holding a new note of profound, professional respect, in perfect order. Chimera Analytics is, as of this morning, the majority shareholder. Mrs. Davenport, my congratulations. So what does this mean? Serafina's voice was a low growl. She was a realist. The fight was over. Now it was time for negotiations. You've won. You have the company. What's your price? What do you want? Amelia turned to her. The polite, mousy wife was gone. In her place was a CEO. Want? I don't want anything. I have everything. This isn't a negotiation, Serafina. This is a new employee orientation. Amelia opened her portfolio again and took out 3 more, very thin, files. She slid one to Richard, one to Serafina, and one to Marcus Thorne. Let's start with you, Richard, she said. Richard, his hand shaking, fumbled with the folder. He opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "This is your golden parachute clause," Amelia explained, her voice as pleasant as if she were discussing the weather. "The one you had the board ratify last year, when you thought you'd be CEO for life. It's very generous. It provides for a severance of $50 million. Richard's eyes widened. "Hope. 50 million. Unfortunately," Amelia continued, "it also contains, in Appendix C, subsection 4, a morality and competence proviso. It states that all benefits are void if the executive is found to be acting against the company's best interests or is found to be, well, grossly incompetent." "You can't prove that," Richard sputtered. "I don't have to," Amelia said. "I own 51.2% of the company. I am the board. I am the compensation committee. And as my first act, as majority shareholder, I am calling an emergency vote. Myself, as 51.2% versus, well, anyone else. I vote that you, Richard Davenport, are grossly incompetent. The motion passes." She smiled, a thin, cold, and terrible smile. "Richard, you're fired. You can't. I just did. Your severance is void. Your company credit cards are, as of 10 minutes ago, declined. Your access to the corporate jet is revoked. The security team at Ethelred Tower is already removing your personal effects from the CEO's office. Oh, and the penthouse, the one Arthur left you. It's not a personal property. It's a corporate apartment owned by Ethelred. You have 24 hours to vacate. My personal security team will be there at noon tomorrow to change the locks. Please don't make it messy." Richard made a choking, gagging sound. He was a king 1 hour ago. Now he was nothing. He had nothing. Amelia turned to Serafina. Serafina was already reading her own file. "A demotion," she said, her voice bitter. "You're not a C-suite executive, Serafina," Amelia said calmly. "You're a brute. You're good at cutting, but you can't build. You're demoted to head of special projects. A title, no budget, no direct reports. You'll be reporting to, well, my new COO, when I hire one. Your salary is cut by 80%, effective immediately. You can take it or you can resign. I don't care which. You think I'll work for you?" Serafina spat. "I think you will," Amelia said, "because you're like me in one way, Serafina. You can't stand to be irrelevant. And you're smart enough to know that 20% of nothing is still nothing. Your 10% share and Richard's 10% share are now minority shares in my company. You can sell them, but I'm the only buyer, and my offer is 1 cent on the dollar. So, stay or go. It makes no difference to the bottom line." Serafina crumpled the paper in her fist, her knuckles white. But she didn't leave. She was beaten. Finally, Amelia turned to Marcus Thorne. He was the only one smiling. "Mrs. Davenport, Amelia, you are a work of art. I came here to buy a company. Instead, I've seen a masterpiece of an execution. My compliments." "Thank you, Marcus. I'm glad you appreciate it." "So," he said, gesturing to the file she'd given him. "What's this?" "My buyout offer," Amelia said. His smile vanished. "What?" "Your $25 billion offer for Ethelred is, as we've established, rejected. My new valuation, combining Ethelred's logistics with Chimera's AI, puts the company at $80 billion. Minimum, so I'm not selling, I'm buying. You're making a tender offer for Thorne Industries?" he said, laughing. "Amelia, my company is bigger than Ethelred. You can't afford me." "Can't I? Marcus, I've been running your numbers too. Your company is over-leveraged. You've got 2 bad loans, one with JP Morgan and one with Deutsche Bank, both due at the end of the quarter. You're expecting to pay them off with the Ethelred acquisition, which you're not getting." She tapped her laptop, which had been sitting, forgotten, on her lap. I'm not making a tender offer. That's too public. Too messy. I'm calling your debt. As of this morning, Chimera Analytics has bought both of those loans from the banks. I am your new creditor, and I'm calling them due, in full, by 5 p.m. today. Thorne's face went the color of ash. You can't. That's $15 billion. Liquid. I know, Amelia said. I have it. Do you? Or you can accept my other offer, the one in that folder. With a trembling hand, Marcus Thorne opened his file. I will buy Thorne Industries in its entirety, Amelia said, for $1. In exchange, I will absorb your $15 billion debt. You will walk away with nothing. No company, no debt. You'll be a free man. This is theft, Thorne gasped. No, Marcus, Amelia said, her voice void of all emotion. This is business. This is how things work. You came here to feast on a carcass. You just didn't realize it was yours. The boardroom, which had been filled with arrogance and high-stakes tension, was now a vacuum of broken men and women. Richard was in a state of shock, his eyes glassy, staring at the rain-lashed window. He had been erased. Serafina was on her phone, her fingers flying, no doubt trying to call her lawyers, her bankers, anyone who could stop the bleeding. But she knew. Her tight, white-lipped expression said it all. She was checkmated. Marcus Thorne, the city's apex predator, was slumped. He was, for the first time in his adult life, comprehensively and completely beaten. He had 15 billion reasons to be. You bitch, Richard finally whispered, the word thick with venom. You were a waitress when I met you. You were nobody. Amelia, who had been packing her portfolio, paused. She looked at her husband, her former husband, in all the ways that mattered. You're right, Richard, she said. I was a nobody. I was a quantitative analyst at J.P. Morgan with a specialty in algorithmic trading. I had a master's in applied mathematics from MIT. I was on the fast track. She walked over to him, her heels clicking on the hardwood. Then I met you. You told me to quit. You said it was unseemly for your wife to have a career. You said you wanted a partner, but what you wanted was a decoration. You wanted me to be quiet. So I was. She leaned in, her voice a soft, dangerous hiss. And while I was being quiet, I was listening. I listened to you boast about deals on the phone. I listened to Serafina complain about supply chain inefficiencies. I listened to your father, Arthur, lament that he had built an empire, only to leave it to a pair of grasping, short-sighted fools. But he was the only one who didn't just see a quiet wife, she continued. He saw a bored genius, and he made a bet, the only smart bet he had left. She straightened up. I was never a librarian. I was a CEO in stealth mode. You gave me the perfect cover, Richard. You told everyone I was fragile. You told everyone I was simple. You made me invisible. And in the world of high finance, being invisible is the ultimate superpower. You didn't just underestimate me. You enabled me. So for that, thank you. It was the final, most devastating blow. She had used his own arrogance as her primary weapon. Now, she said, her voice returning to its crisp, boardroom tone. Mr. Hale, my work here is done. Serafina, you have 24 hours to accept my offer. After that, your 10% stake will be re-evaluated as a hostile asset, and I will freeze you out of the company entirely. Serafina looked up, her eyes burning. I accept. Good. You're smarter than your brother. Marcus, Amelia said. 5 p.m. Thorne just nodded, a dead man walking. And Richard, she said, pausing at the door. One last thing. He looked up, his eyes hollow. The desk. The one Arthur left me. It's where he signed his first deal. It's where he gave me the $1 million for Chimera. It's where I will be sitting tomorrow when I take my place as CEO of Ethelred Holdings. She let that sink in. But the books, the first edition novels, I don't have time for fiction. She looked at Mr. Hale. Mr. Hale, please have them donated to the public library. Perhaps, she glanced at Richard, someone else can find a use for them. And with that, Amelia Davenport, the ignored wife, the majority shareholder, the new queen of the city, turned and walked out of the boardroom. She didn't slam the door, she just closed it. Softly. Click. The rain outside had finally stopped. The click of the boardroom door closing was the softest sound imaginable, yet it echoed in the cavernous silence like a felled tree. For a full 10 seconds, the only movement was the last, dying shudder of the rain against the 40th floor window. Then, the vacuum was filled by a sound. It was a low, animalistic groan from Richard Davenport. He was staring at the door, his face a mottled, greyish purple. He looked like a man who had been struck by lightning and was only just realizing he was dead. She, he stammered, his hands flapping uselessly at his sides. Hale, you let this happen. You're a part of this. I'll have you disbarred. I'll have you ruined. Mr. Hale, who had been methodically placing his documents back into his monogrammed briefcase, didn't even look up. My license to practice law, he said, his voice a dry rustle, is, unlike your former company, perfectly secure, Mr. Davenport. I executed the legal and binding will of your father. Then, I was a witness to a legal and binding corporate takeover. My job here is finished. He snapped his briefcase shut. She can't do this, Richard whispered, his voice cracking. He turned to his sister, a desperate, childlike panic in his eyes. Sarah, tell them. Tell them she can't do this. We're the family. We're Davenports. Seraphina Davenport Blackwood had not moved. She was still standing where she'd accepted her demotion. Her fist was still clenched around the crumpled paper, but her eyes were not hollow like Richard's. They were two burning coals of ice. She was past fury, past shock, and deep into the cold, bitter tundra of calculation. She did do it, Richard, she said, her voice a low, terrifying rasp. While you were playing CEO, she was playing God, and she won. No, yes, Seraphina screamed, finally unleashing a fraction of her rage. She won. 5 years. She sat in our homes. She smiled at our jokes. And she was building a guillotine. Now it's fallen. So shut up. Stop talking. You sound like a child. You're giving her exactly what she wants. Richard stumbled back, collapsing into his chair. He put his head in his hands, his $5,000 tie askew, his Zegna suit feeling like a straitjacket. He was, for the first time, truly and completely silent. The only other person left was Marcus Thorne, the shark. He hadn't moved. He was staring at the file with the $1 buyout offer. He hadn't even opened it. He knew what was inside. Mr. Thorne, Hale said, pausing at the door out of professional courtesy. My condolences on the market's volatility. Thorne slowly lifted his head. The predatory gleam was gone. His eyes were empty, the eyes of a man who had run a marathon only to be told he'd been running in the wrong direction for 26 miles. She didn't just buy my debt, Hale, Thorne whispered, a strange hollow laugh escaping him. She bought it from my bankers, J.P. Morgan, Deutsche. She must have had leverage on them to force a sale of a performing loan. His mind was turning, seeing the shadow of a shadow. He was looking at a 3-dimensional chess game and realizing he'd been playing checkers. She didn't just beat me, Thorne said to the empty room. She unmade me. Mr. Hale gave a single, curt nod. Indeed. Good day, gentlemen. Miss Blackwood. The door clicked shut again. This time, for good. The three of them, the fool, the snake, and the shark, were left alone in the tomb. Seraphina was the first to move. She did not give her brother a second glance. She walked out of the boardroom, her back ramrod straight, and into the elevator. The entire ride down, she did not blink. She was already formulating a plan. She got to her car and dialed her personal lawyer at Sullivan and Cromwell. "Gavin," she said, her voice steel. "Pull the Ethelred bylaws. Pull the state registration for Chimera Analytics. I want to find an injunction. I want to contest the will on grounds of undue influence. Mental. Something." Gavin was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was grave. "Sarah, I've been on the phone for the last hour. So has every other corporate lawyer in the city. The news is out. We're already getting conflict of interest notices. Cravath, Swain and Moore is representing her. Cravath, Sarah. They've built a wall of legal fire around this thing. The filings for the 11.2% stock purchase are. They're beautiful. They're a work of art. She's been doing this for 18 months through 36 shell corporations. So fight them, she hissed. With what? Richard's 10% and your 10% are now minority shares. She has 51.2%. She is the board. She is the company. You can sue, and she will use the full, unlimited resources of your own company to countersue you into oblivion. Any lawsuit you file will be frivolous. You'll be sanctioned, and you'll be finished in this town. The silence in the car was absolute. So, Seraphina said, that's it. That's it. My advice? Take whatever she offered you. Take the demotion. Live to fight another day. What kind of lawyer are you? She snapped. The kind that's telling you you're not in a fight. You're in a surrender. Sign the paper, Seraphina, or she'll just fire you, and your 10% stake will be worthless, locked in a company you have no say in. At least this way, you're still in the building. The line went dead. Seraphina sat in her Bentley for a full hour in the parking garage as the world she knew dissolved around her. The next morning, at 8:59 a.m., she walked into the Ethelred Tower. She was dressed impeccably. She tried her executive keycard on the private elevator. Access denied. The humiliation was a hot, physical slap. She had to walk back to the main lobby, her heels echoing, and stand with the administrative assistants and mailroom clerks, waiting for the public bank of elevators. She felt their eyes on her. The news was everywhere. She was a ghost. Her new office was in sub-basement C. It was a converted storage closet, cinder block walls, a flickering fluorescent light, a metal desk. There was no computer. There was no phone. There was only, as promised, a stack of files, archived logistics invoices. From 2005, she stood in the center of the room, her Alexander McQueen suit seeming to mock the sheer poverty of the space. She took off her jacket. She hung it on the back of the cheap metal chair. She undid her cuffs, and she sat down. She opened the first file. It was a shipping manifest from a port in Singapore. She read it. She would read every single one. She would learn. She would wait. She would be the perfect, demoted employee. She would adapt. She would survive. And one day, Amelia would make a mistake. She would get complacent. And Seraphina would be there, in the sub-basement, waiting. Marcus Thorne did not wait for the 5 p.m. deadline. He knew a death sentence when he saw one. He returned to his own office, a glass and steel palace overlooking the city he had, until this morning, considered his. He didn't call his lawyers. He didn't call his board. He called his daughter, who was studying art history in Florence. "Hey, Pumpkin," he said, his voice surprisingly light. "How's the Uffizi?" They talked for 20 minutes about Renaissance art, about the food, about a boy she'd met. He didn't mention a single thing. "I love you, kiddo," he said. "Be good." He hung up. He looked at the $1 buyout contract Amelia's lawyers had couriered over. It was simple. 1 page. He would trade his entire company, Thorn Industries, for $1, and Chimera Analytics would assume his $15 billion in crushing now-due debt. He thought, for a fleeting second, about the gun in his desk drawer. A coward's way out. And worse, it would be messy. It would leave the debt, the lawsuits, the chaos for his daughter to clean up. This was clean. Amelia was offering him an erasure, an escape. He would walk away with nothing, but he would also walk away free. No debt, no SEC investigations into his over-leveraged deals, no angry shareholders, just nothing. He signed the paper. Marcus Thorn. The signature was firm. At 4:32 p.m., he faxed it to the number at Cravath. At 4:33 p.m., the Wall Street Journal alert hit every phone in the financial world. Thorn Industries acquired in shocking deal by unknown hedge fund, Chimera Analytics. Marcus Thorn stood up. He took off his $50,000 Patek Philippe watch and laid it on the desk. He placed his company credit cards next to it. He put his office keycard on top. He walked out of his office, past his stunned assistant, and into the elevator. He walked out of the building, a man in a very expensive suit with nowhere to go. He was a ghost, too. But he was a free one. Richard, however, didn't go quietly. Richard imploded. He was locked out of the penthouse by noon. His personal belongings, thrown into a set of Louis Vuitton trunks by Amelia's curt security team, were sitting on the curb of Park Avenue when he arrived. He screamed at the doorman. He kicked one of his own trunks. He went to the bank. His accounts were frozen, all of them, even his personal ones. They can't be," he'd yelled at the teller. "I'm sorry, Mr. Davenport," the bank manager, a man who had flattered him just last week, said coolly. "We've received a court order from the U.S. Attorney's Office. A full asset freeze, pending an investigation into... Well, sir, it seems to be about everything." That's when he went to the press. Not to a real newsroom, but to a reporter he knew was a bottom feeder, one who would print anything. He met him at a bar. "She's a viper," he slurred, 3 scotches in. "A gold-digging whore. I picked her up from nothing. She was a waitress, a librarian. She seduced my father. The old man was senile. She forged the will. She's a criminal. I'm the victim here. I'm Richard Davenport, and she stole my company." The story ran on a sleazy financial blog the next morning, under the headline, "Davenport Scion alleges sexual conspiracy in hostile takeover." It was a Tuesday. On Wednesday, Amelia held her first press conference. The main atrium of Ethelred Tower was a zoo. Every major news outlet was there. The Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, the Financial Times. They had come to see the mystery woman, the Viper of Park Avenue. Amelia walked onto the stage at 10 a.m. sharp, not in a grey dress. She wore a custom-made navy blue power suit that was the colour of a midnight storm. Her hair was not in a bun. It was down, sleek and sharp. She was not the wife. She was the CEO. The new logo, a stylized A merging with a C, Ethelred Chimera, was projected on a massive screen behind her. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was calm, clear, and carried in the dead silent room. "My name is Amelia Davenport. For the past 5 years, many of you have known me as... well, you haven't. As of today, I am the CEO and majority shareholder of Ethelred Chimera. I understand there has been some speculation regarding the transition. She looked at her notes. My husband, Richard Davenport, has made several passionate allegations. He's called me a gold digger, a librarian, a whore. He has painted a picture of a man wronged. I am here to provide context. She gestured to the large screen. For 5 years, my husband believed I was redecorating our home. I was, in a way. I was installing a new data architecture. Chimera Analytics wasn't just built to analyze market fluctuations. It was built to model human behavior, to find patterns, to find threats. And Mr. Davenport, my husband, was a very predictable, high-risk variable. The screen flickered. An audio file, Richard's voice, booming and drunk. The old man's a fool, I tell you. He's letting the company rot. I'm moving millions into an offshore shell, just in case, skimming a little. What he doesn't know won't hurt him. And the wife? She just redecorates. It's perfect. Gasps rippled through the room. That was skimming, as he calls it, Amelia said. But my algorithm flagged 4 to 12 such high-risk recordings. Here is another. A new file. Richard, on the phone. The transfer to the Cayman account is complete. Yes, Project Legacy. That's what I'm calling it. My legacy, not his. And my personal favorite, Amelia said, her voice turning to ice. This one was from just 6 months ago. He was speaking to another executive. He believed they were conspiring to oust his sister, Serafina. The audio played, Richard's voice, full of arrogant conspiracy. My sister's too cold. The board hates her. Once the old man's gone, we push her out, take her 10%. It'll be my 20%, and I'll be king. She'll be out on the street with the rest of them. Family is just an obstacle. In the sub-basement, a small radio on a clerk's desk was playing the press conference. Serafina heard it. She stopped reading. A single cold tear of pure, unadulterated hatred rolled down her cheek. Not for Amelia, for her brother. My husband, Amelia continued on stage, didn't just skim. He embezzled. The total, verified by a forensic team from Deloitte and Chimera's own analytics, is $250,000. She looked up. I have, of course, turned this and all 412 recordings, along with the corresponding offshore bank data, over to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. A commotion started at the back of the atrium. A reporter shouted, "What's that?" "In fact," Amelia said, "I believe the U.S. Attorney's Office has been waiting for this confirmation." She nodded to the back. 2 men in dark, severe suits, U.S. Marshals, began walking down the center aisle. The cameras, in a frantic wave, swung away from Amelia and toward them. They were walking, stopping. In the back row, trying to hide in plain sight, was Richard. He had come to heckle. He had come to see his victim squirm. He saw the marshals. He saw their badges. He saw their hands reaching for him. "No," he gasped, his face draining of all color. "No, you, she's the liar. She's the—" "Richard Davenport," one of the marshals said, his voice a flat, unimpressed boom. "You are under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, and embezzlement." They pulled his hands behind his back. The click of the handcuffs was caught by every microphone. Richard, the king, the heir, was being arrested. In public. At his own wife's press conference. It was the ultimate, final, and most public humiliation. He was a fool, and now the entire world knew it. As they dragged him, shouting and blubbering up the aisle, Amelia watched. Her face was a mask of cold, serene, and absolute control. The room was in chaos. Journalists were screaming questions. One reporter, from the Wall Street Journal, finally got her voice above the din. Mrs. Davenport, What you did to your husband, to his sister, to Marcus Thorne. It's been called ruthless, cold, unforgiving. How do you respond to that?" Amelia waited for the room to quiet. She waited for every camera to be on her. She looked at the journalist. "You call it ruthless," she said, "because I am a woman. If I were a man, you would call it a brilliant strategic move. I am not cold. I am precise. I am not unforgiving. I am competent." She paused, then delivered the line that would be on the cover of Forbes, Fortune, and Time. The line that would define her legacy. They all thought they were in a meeting about an inheritance. They were wrong. It was a hostile takeover. And I was the only one who came prepared. Thank you. Ethelred Chimera is now moving forward. We are hiring. And just like that, the quiet wife nobody even bothered to offer a cup of coffee to, the woman who was told to sit there and be quiet, ended up owning the entire room. Amelia didn't just get a seat at the table. She revealed that she'd built the table, the building, and the entire city block it sat on. She proved that the most dangerous person in the room is often the one everyone ignores. Richard and Serafina learned a hard lesson. Never, ever underestimate the person who just listens. What did you think of Amelia's ultimate power move? Was it pure, cold-blooded revenge, or was it the most brilliant business strategy you've ever heard? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you love stories about sweet, karmic justice and the underdog turning the tables, make sure you hit that like button. Every like helps us find more stories like this one. And don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to see that the quiet ones are the ones to watch. Most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss a single second of drama and retribution.